Hi, everyone, and welcome to the latest Career Talks. We have a really great guest today, Linda Rayner, who is a career strategist. She is a career coach, and she is also a founder of the Top Notch Resume and Top Notch Interviews. So, welcome, Linda.
Hi, Andrew, and hi, everyone from all over.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for joining us because resumes are really a foundational element of a job search. A lot of people they don't like writing resumes, but it's such a crucial part of how you get your foot in the door. So I guess my first question for you, and also just this is just a reminder to everyone out there, is as you get questions, put them in the comments because we're going to be taking them at the end of the show. So Linda, what's the number one misconception people have about resumes?
Yes, when it comes to misconceptions, I would say there are probably two major ones. The very first misconception that a lot of job candidates have is that they treat their resume as if it's a laundry list, where it's a dumping ground, where they have to dump every single detail, every single task, every assignment, every project that they've ever worked on. They think that they have to include it on their resume. And for some reason, it's as if people, I mean, I've worked with a lot of job candidates who fear that maybe somebody's going to find out that they're not including every single detail, and that's not true. First of all, nobody scopes through your resume and looks to see if you've listed everything that you've ever done. And on top of that, that's not what hiring managers are looking for. You really want to make sure, which we're going to learn today, that you have relevant experience, relevant skills included on your resume, because that's what they want to see. So that's the first misconception. The second misconception is I find a lot of job candidates, they feel that the resume writing process is sort of just a one and done process, meaning you just write one version of your resume and then you blast it out to hundreds of jobs that you're interested in. And the truth here is that's a misconception, because every job is slightly different. Every job is unique. Even though it might be the same type of job, every company requires slightly different skills or qualifications or aspects that they're looking for in a candidate. And so you have to tailor your resume for every job. Now, tailoring does not mean rewriting. Okay, I want to make that clear. It's impossible to rewrite your resume every single time. But if you have the right format and the right strategy, which is what we're going to talk about, then you should be able to make just a few tweaks and you'll have a standout resume for them.
Yeah, I think that is such an important point is that when you talk about tailoring your resume, it doesn't mean starting from scratch every single time. And I think a lot of people, they hear that and they just say, okay, I give up. I'm going to start just sending out the same resume over and over again. So I'm really happy that you highlighted that. And, to people out there who say, listen, I don't like writing resumes, i- you know, no one does. I don't like writing resumes, and a lot of times people will message me and ask me to write theirs. And I'm sure, Linda, I'm sure you get that from your friends and family too.
Yes,
Yeah.
often.
So, for people who are struggling, and honestly, as someone who, I went to school for journalism, I was a reporter for many years. One of the biggest hurdles that you face is a blank sheet of paper or a blank Word document. So, when it comes to writing your resume from scratch, where do you start?
Great question. So there are a few things to consider. I think a lot of it starts off before you even type anything onto the Word document. The first thing that you want to get clear when it comes to writing your resume from scratch is know what job title it is that you're going for. What type of job are you going for? You don't want to start your job search, your resume writing process with a slew of different job titles that you want to pursue, because that's just going to confuse you in terms of how you're going to prepare your resume. You want to start with the type of job that you most desire, that you feel is the right next step for you, that you feel you have sufficient education, experience, skills, qualifications in, that you can potentially land that position. So, I mean, I have an accounting background, and so I use a lot of accounting examples when I teach this stuff. But for example, anyone who's in accounting would understand that there's a difference between a senior accountant versus a senior financial analyst. They have two different skill sets, they have different responsibilities in each of the job. And so you want to decide between the two, do I want to go for this or that? And from there, you hone in and you're able to then start the process of slowly building up your resume, writing your resume. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you want to learn how to speak the hiring manager's language. Okay, so this is what a lot of job candidates don't understand. They feel that writing a resume is just the process of looking into the ceiling, looking into the sky, going back in their brain, and coming up with words and sentences that they think would be a match to what the hiring manager would want. And that's not the process at all. There is a language that you have to learn. There's, just like with any new language, you have to learn the vocabulary. You have to understand how things are written. You have to understand how they're spoken. And so you want to immerse yourself in that. And the way to immerse yourself in that is to gather good job descriptions. And so that means going on LinkedIn Jobs, doing your research, going on other career search websites, finding good job descriptions and using them as the foundation for your resume. So that's what it starts with, is gathering good job descriptions.
Yeah, that is such an important point, and I see Jennifer in the comments saying that a lot of times the problem she runs into is that she finds employers don't know what they want. And Jennifer, you're not alone. There are a lot of bad job descriptions out there, but there are a lot of good ones. And usually the companies that have good job descriptions, in my experience, are the ones who are putting resources behind their hiring process. And honestly, they're the ones who usually have their eye on the ball and are probably a better culture, not all the time, but it's a really good signal if the company has good job descriptions. But the problem is, how do you tell a good job description from a bad one? So, Linda, how do you do that? What is the difference between good job descriptions and bad job descriptions?
Yes, great question. So, I mean, if you've been job searching for a while, you've probably seen some not so good job descriptions. And I'm not here to say, like, if you find bad job descriptions, not so good, whatever you want to call them, if you find them, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't apply to those jobs. By all means, apply to them, but only after you've built your resume off of good job descriptions. Because even for a bad job description, even those hiring managers want to see good resumes, even if they gave you a crappy job description to work with. You still want to build a strong, solid resume. And so a bad job description or a not so good job description is one that doesn't really give you a lot of detail about what the job does, what they require, what the company wants from you as a candidate. And so, for example, if we take a look at what a bad job description looks like, I mean, this might be something you've seen before where the bullet points are very short. It's just very vague, sparse. This is for a technician, mechanical engineering technician, where, as you can see, there is nothing on there that talks about what the job actually does. It's just very high level, very vague. And so there aren't any responsibilities or keywords. And so when it comes to a good job description, before we look at what that actually entails, what you have to remember is that there are three key sections that you want to identify that belong to good job descriptions. And that is the summary, the responsibilities, and the qualifications. If a job description has three, if they break out their bullet points into three sections like that, where they talk about a summary or an overview, and they talk about responsibilities, where they detail in full sentences the bullet points for what they're asking for in terms of tasks that you'll be doing. And then they also talk about technical qualifications that you need to have as a job candidate. That's considered a good job description. And those are the best ones to use to help you to build the foundation of your resume. So if we take a look at a good job description here, this is just a section of a good job description. Of course, given space, we don't have the opportunity to look at a full detailed job description, but just as you can see, just from first glance, you can already see in this one where it's a mechanical engineering technician job as well, where they've actually listed out, this looks more like the responsibility section. They've listed out exactly what it is that you're going to be doing as a job candidate: participate in machinery installation, repair and maintenance, assist in preparing design, drawings and specifications, et cetera, et cetera. So they're full sentences, they're well written, they're detailed, they include the three sections like I mentioned, and they thoroughly explain the job, and it gives you a sense of what the hiring manager wants. So you're going to want to grab 3 to 5 of these good job descriptions to help you form the basis of your resume to start.
Yeah, I think this is a really good juxtaposition between bad and good. And also, what I like about good job descriptions is that a lot of times a good job description is because the hiring manager has really thought about what they need or what problems they need solved. Don't you think? Usually, the hiring experience for you as a job seeker is better, I think, often from those job descriptions.
Yes, for sure. You can gain a lot of insight. I mean, I know someone had mentioned that you can't tell what a hiring manager wants. If you really learn how to read a job description in detail, you can actually gain a good sense as to what it is they are looking for in a candidate. And that will only help you with not only the resume, but then going on for the interview as well.
Definitely. And so once you get a bunch of these good job descriptions, say you get a handful, like maybe 5, and you say, "Okay, this seems like the job I want. All of them are a little bit different, but this is pretty much the area that I want to be in." What do you do then?
Yes. So, what you're really looking for, I mean, aside from the summary, the responsibilities, and the qualifications, what you're really looking for is what I call keywords. Okay. So, what are keywords? Keywords are key actions, tasks, responsibilities, knowledge requirements of the position. They basically form the role and they tend to be repeated throughout the job description. So, what you'll notice is that when you start to look at multiple job descriptions, you'll notice that there are patterns and commonalities across the different descriptions. You'll notice that, oh, there are commonly the same verbs being used. Perhaps they all require you to analyze reports, analyze this type of report, analyze that type of report. So now you know, okay, that's actually a keyword because it's repeated, it's repetitive, it's common across multiple job descriptions, and so that's what you want to start taking note of is the keywords. This is how you form your vocabulary. Like I say, this is how you learn the hiring manager's language.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think that's really good. And then once you have the keyword inventory list, like I'm looking at some of these now, how do you apply that to the resume? So you sort of are looking at these good job descriptions, and then you say, okay, I see these keywords, things like that. What do you do then?
Yes. Okay. So once you've seen the keywords, you start highlighting the keywords right on the job descriptions, and then what I would say is open up a Word document, open up an Excel spreadsheet, and start building out what you call an inventory list of keywords. So this again is all about building up your vocabulary. So you'll start to make note of the most common keywords. You'll start to have a list for yourself of knowing what exactly these jobs are asking for from a responsibility standpoint, from a task standpoint, that sort of thing. And then once you have that inventory list, then from there you're finally ready to take the step of actually opening up a Word document and starting to use those keywords to string together bullet points and essentially section together your first draft of your resume.
Yeah, that's really great advice. And I guess, when it comes down to sort of the keywords and tailoring your resume to the job description. So, say you have like 3 jobs that you have lined up and you want to, speak the manager's language, but then you also want to tailor your resume, how far can you tailor it without feeling like you're not being authentic? Because I think that's sort of an area where people sometimes feel like they're making missteps.
Yes, I mean this is the thing is that you don't want to be completely entirely copying and pasting what's on the job description and then throwing that on your resume and saying that that's all you. That's not the case. Remember that what you're looking for, like I said, are the keywords. So what are the key tasks, key responsibilities that these jobs are asking for? And then you have to do the process. This is where you actually can think. Okay, but up until this point, it's actually all mechanical. It's all process oriented. You just kind of go through the steps of highlighting keywords, making a list, and then deciding which ones you want to use. But now you can actually reflect and ask yourself, okay, out of all of these keywords, which ones relate to me? Where in my experience, have I prepared reports? What kind of reports have I prepared? And how have I prepared them? And why did I prepare them? So now it's your chance to add your flair to it, to cater and tailor those keywords to your experience so that your resume is unique and it represents exactly what the company wants, but also in terms of your experience. So it's reflecting both.
Got it. And now, when it comes to speaking the hiring manager's language, is that the same thing as tailoring your resume, or is that something a little bit different? What is your advice for that?
I would say speaking the hiring manager's language still comes from knowing the vocabulary, knowing what it is that hiring managers are looking for. And again, it all stems generally from the job description. I mean, that's really all we have to work with here, truthfully. When you're applying for a job, you don't have access to much. You can go on the LinkedIn, their LinkedIn profiles, you can go on the company website, but really the job description is where it's at. And so if you can understand within this job, these are the key responsibilities, the key tasks, the key qualifications that they're looking for in a job candidate. From there, once you go, once you've built the resume and you go into the interview, you're going to still leverage all those keywords that you've built up in your vocabulary, and you're going to leverage them and create stories that I call them SAR stories, but you're going to create stories that are engaging and share with the hiring manager how you've been able to demonstrate that particular task or skill that they're asking for.
Yeah, that makes sense. And now, when it comes in, I see this from Tara in the comments, and does it make sense to, so say you're applying to be a software engineer, and a company uses a slightly modified name for that? Should you tailor that to be what the company calls it, or should you stick with software engineer, which is what you were called at your last company?
That's a really good question, and I would say it combines your comfort level as well as what the standard is. So what I mean by that is, if you're a software engineer and the company has a very specific title for their software engineers, I mean, it really has to be, you have to determine for yourself, is this a standard title that's within the industry that software engineers, or I don't know what the other version of it would be. Are they interchangeable? If they're interchangeable and industry standard says, yeah, you can be one or the other, it's the same type of job, then absolutely I would cater the resume to sound like what the company is asking for, meaning use their job title and call yourself that. And as long as, it's the same type of job that you have experience in. Now, if it's completely different, this is where completely different from your previous experience, this is where I would make real good use of the keywords within the rest of the resume and not necessarily the job title portion. I would probably keep the job title that you currently possess and use all the other keywords that the job title has, that job description has, and make sure that you emphasize those throughout the entire resume, so that even if your job title isn't the exact same as the job that you're going for, but your bullet points and the keywords that you're using are similar and actually are the same, and you're proving that you have the experience that they're asking for, that's still going to help you. That's actually going to help you to still potentially land the interview and get the job offer. And it's worked with clients that I've worked with in the past.
That's fantastic. And I'm so happy we're getting into like the nuts and bolts of a resume. I think it's going to help so many people. And to all of you out there, remember, get your questions in. We already have so many coming in, but we'll be answering those at the end of the show. And then, as a lot of you are asking, don't worry, this is being recorded. And then once we are done with the show, once you hit refresh, we will have this recording here for you, so you could watch all of this wonderful advice again from Linda. And my next question is format, because people, they go online, they look for resume formats, and there are thousands. There are colorful ones, there are ones that start with experience, there's ones that start with skills, there's some that start with like education. Where should people start? What is the best format for a resume?
Yes. Oh, great question. I would say it's definitely not the format that you learned back in high school. If you ever took grade 10, your careers class, where they told you to write the objective, and then it was a very straightforward, short, vague bullet point, almost like a bad job description type of resume that I remember learning in high school. Definitely not that. And I have a very strict format for what I would tell every single person, no matter what industry, what job title you possess, you're going to follow this format. This is my own, from having been a recruiter and a career strategist. The three components that you want to have on your resume: the first is what I call a profile. And the profile represents the overview of your experience and the qualifications that you possess. So it's the high-level summary of who you are, right in a quick snapshot. And I can explain that more in a bit. From there, you're going to want to have your professional experience fully laid out. Now, this is the meat of the resume. This is where a lot of people get hung up on in terms of putting too many bullet points or too few bullet points. And then the last, I would say, is education, especially if you're someone who already has work experience, even just a few years, that's what hiring managers are wanting to see, more so rather than your education. As much as education is important, but if you have what they require from an education standpoint, it's not as vital for you to include it at the beginning. If anything, it's better to just put it at the end because you want to highlight what you bring to the table from a skills, qualifications, experience standpoint instead.
Yeah.
So
And
responsibilities and education.
yeah, and I'm so happy you mentioned the objective. I do not. A lot of people, they still think an objective is important at the top of the resume, and I always tell them never include that. Your objective is to get a job, and if someone receives your resume, they know that implicitly. So don't worry about objective, and we'll obviously get into your comments about profile and things like that. But something that I want to get to before we even get to that is applicant tracking systems. And I know some people in the comments I've been watching have been asking about these, which are sort of the ideas that there are bots that are going to sort out your resume and things like that. But can you tell us what applicant tracking systems are? Because there's so much misinformation about them out on the internet.
Yes, yes. Applicant tracking systems, I feel are, well, in terms of what they are, it's a computer software that's designed to scan resumes, and it'll scan out resumes for certain keywords, and it'll weed out the ones that don't match what the job description entails. Now, here's the thing though about applicant tracking systems. A lot of people freak out about them. And the truth is if you are following this process of leveraging job descriptions and keywords, and you're using the job descriptions to build your resume, as we were describing today, and you're following the strategy, then you don't need to worry at all about what happens with the applicant tracking systems. You're going to pass it for sure, because again, they're using the job descriptions to identify keywords, and you're using the job descriptions to use the keywords to put on your resume. So you're all doing the same thing. And so that's when you really don't have to worry. The one time that you should worry about applicant tracking systems is if you're not following this process and this system that we're talking about, and you're just writing your resume just from the top of your head and using your own memory and thoughts. That's where I would worry.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And, for people out there, I think they're so scared of applicant tracking systems. And what I always tell them is like, it's basically a big Excel sheet or a big Google Doc sheet where recruiters, hiring managers, they're seeing who is in queue for the job. So even if the applicant tracking system scans a resume, looks for keywords, things like that, the recruiter, the hiring manager, they're still seeing the resumes. So there's still a person behind all of this. The recruiter, they're the ones who control the applicant tracking system. And the vast majority of recruiters that I've talked to throughout my life, throughout my career, they actually do go through and read all of the resumes at some of the larger companies. There are actually recruiters that just do that. So, don't worry necessarily about the applicant tracking systems because they all have different capabilities. Some are smarter, some are dumber, but really at the end of the day, they're a big filing cabinet and there's still a human on the other side of it. So what you need to be prepared for is to put out the best resume, put out the best application that you can. And honestly, one of the things that I always tell people about the whole process is that when you are on a website inputting your information into a job application, you're actually dealing with an applicant tracking system, just the front end of it. And all that information then goes into sort of basically a file for a recruiter and a hiring manager to look at. So I love your point about, if you're just doing a good job application, if you're doing a great job on your resume, you don't even have to worry about that. So I really appreciate that point. And going back to the profile part of all of this, what is that? Can you tell us a little bit about what that should be at the top of a resume?
Yes, profile. So, I mean, one thing I want to point out is that a lot of people don't even include this particular section on their resume, which is the profile or summary on your resume. And that is, I would say, a grave mistake, because here's the thing. It only takes a recruiter or a hiring manager a few seconds to review your resume that very first time. And from there, they'll know if they want to continue you forward in that process of potentially calling you in for the interview or just deleting and checking you into the trash bin. And so this is important because if you have a profile or a summary overview, that's where their eyes are going to go to first when they're first scanning that resume in the first 3 seconds. And so you want to make sure that that profile gives you the overview of who you are from a title standpoint, what skills and experience you possess, and the qualifications that you have that are in line with the job that you're applying for. And so, there are several components and several bullet points that are included in a profile that, unfortunately, due to interest of time and all that, we don't have the ability to get into. But I would talk about the very first bullet point, and that is that you want to label yourself as the job title or similar job title to what it is that you're applying for. That's the first thing. So if you're a financial analyst and you're applying for a financial analyst job, fantastic. Make sure that goes right in there in that first bullet point, that you're a financial analyst with what types of experiences and skills that you bring. And again, these are going to come back to the keywords that you did all that work researching and highlighting. And from there, you're going to also talk about the qualifications, the type of industry that you possess. So that's all going to go in that very first bullet point. It's going to seem a little bit run on. I mean, that's my that's just how it might look, but it's all part of the process of the hiring manager scanning and seeing ding, 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 ding. You match so many keywords of what the job is asking for right off the bat. And so that's why having a profile, having a summary and overview of who you are as a candidate is really important.
Yeah. And also, I think beyond just sort of when we were talking about the applicant tracking system, when you talk about keywords and getting them into the resume, one of the great things about it too is that a recruiter's looking for those words just like anyone else. So, if they see in the job description that there are certain technical skills that you need to have and you list them on your resume, they're going to be looking for those just like Linda said, bing, 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 like to know that, you have those skills, you have those abilities. So that's also a great reason to make sure that you're looking at the job description and translating that onto your resume. Now, Linda, the professional experience part, that is sort of the meat of the resume, I think, because it tells you, where you've been, what you've done. So what should people put in their professional experience?
Yes. So when it comes to professional experience, just like you said, Andrew, it's the meat of the resume. You want to obviously include the company that you've worked at, the companies that you've worked at, the job titles and the dates, the exact clear dates, the month and year, that from when to when that you've worked at those companies. But you definitely also want to have very clear, well-written bullet points, responsibility bullet points is what I call them, that outline exactly what it is that you did in those jobs. And here's the thing, they have to be relevant. I think I've mentioned this a few times already. They have to be relevant to the job that you're applying for. You do not have to dump every single task, duty, assignment that you've ever worked on in that job in your resume. You just have to pick out the relevant bullet points, just relevant keywords and relevant tasks that you've done. And so, I mean, I can even talk about what the formula for a responsibility bullet point would look like. And that would be what you did. So the action. So let's say it's prepare financial statements or prepare reports or develop analysis. And then how you did it. And this is a little bit more flexible. How, when I say how, it could be exactly that, how you did it. Like, did you compile data from a certain system? Or it could be just giving it more context, like from a time frame perspective, how long does it take you to do that thing? Or how often do you do it? So you could say prepare reports on a monthly, quarterly, and annual basis. I mean, that's just giving a little bit more context. And then the last part is the why. Why do you do what you do? The purpose behind what you do. And this is the part that a lot of people miss out on. And it could be as simple as to support management decision making if that task is directly related to that. But you have to understand, why do I do this particular task? If you're only listing out the tasks themselves, that's not showing to the employer from a communication standpoint that you truly understand your role, that you understand the nuances of why you do what you do. And it just it doesn't make you stand out essentially. So you want to include those three components: the what, the how, and the why. And the other thing that I also want to say about professional experience that I don't want to forget is, after you've written those responsibility bullet points, you also want to, right underneath them, include accomplishments and actually have a section specifically for that particular job. Okay, because this is where a lot of people make the mistake where they include an entirely completely different section on their resume where they just put accomplishments and then they list out a bunch of accomplishments. And as a recruiter or a hiring manager, they have no idea what that accomplishment relates to in terms of what company you did that accomplishment at, what job you did that in. So you don't want to have a section. That's why I don't have a section like that. You have that, it's like a subsection underneath these responsibilities. For each job, you want to have at least one, maybe two accomplishments that you list where they are quantifiable. So a formula for accomplishment would be, what did you successfully do? Okay, what did you successfully do? What was the accomplishment itself? You successfully created a new template. Okay, let's, as an example, what did it result in? And this is the thing. Generally, an accomplishment is an accomplishment because it resulted in something, whether it was a time savings, you saved 3 hours of work for the team, or 3 days of work, or it's a cost savings, ideally, if you knew that it resulted in a quantifiable amount, or if it was that an increased revenue or increased profit in some way. So save time, save money, or improved profitability. And then on top of that, you want to make sure that you quantify that. So as long as it has a number, a percentage, a dollar value associated to it, that helps to really solidify the accomplishment.
Yeah, that's a great crash course into sort of what to put in that experience and what those bullet points should be. And, I always tell people that, even if you are in a creative position, doesn't mean that you didn't have quantifiable, metrics. Maybe it's that you had to produce a certain amount of copy each day. Maybe it's that you had to churn out a certain number of stories. So even in the most creative jobs, there's usually some metrics in there that you can dig into. And what I usually suggest to people is keep a little journal off to the side. And when you get wins, when people give you feedback, when you get a number, you mark that down. And then later on, you have that to reference, whether it's during a performance review or when you're writing your resume. And now we're getting almost to the end of my questions here, and we have so many good ones coming in. So I'm looking forward to getting to those. And Linda, my next question, though, to round out the resume part of this is education. What do we do with that?
Yeah, honestly, education is the most straightforward one, and that's what you want to make sure that you do, is to keep it straightforward. I've seen people put in their education sections a whole slew of things, like courses that they've taken from 10 years ago, and all obscure certifications that are completely irrelevant to the job. I would say cut those things out. Just keep it straight to the point. Talk about the institutions, the universities, the colleges, whatever it is that you attended, the degrees, the certifications, the diplomas that you received, and the dates. And of course, if there's something unique about that, in the sense that, let's say you were the top student there, or you received really high grades and you received recognition for that, fine, you can absolutely include that, but you don't have to list everything from an education standpoint that you studied, that you learned, especially if it's not relevant. So just keep it short and sweet in your education section.
Yeah, and especially, the farther you get from your graduation or your last education, I think the least, or at least the less important it becomes, don't you think?
Exactly. I agree with you. And I actually want to just go back to that previous point, Andrew, that you had said about keeping track of your accomplishments. I know that we're talking about education here, but I think that is an excellent suggestion. And that's something that I always recommend to all individuals, all professionals, is when you're starting a new job, or if you're in your current job right now, but you want to leave, you still have to do that reflection of, what have I accomplished? What have I done successfully? And figure out the numbers behind it if you can, and write that down, because you will forget. And then when it comes to performance review time or writing a resume time, you can definitely pull them out and use them to your advantage.
Yeah, and also if you are at an employer and, like I said, we've heard a lot of headlines, we've seen a lot of headlines about layoffs. Always print off your performance reviews or anything else that you want to reference later on, because sometimes if you're laid off, you lose access to those. So you want to make sure you have a file of those at home. And Linda, my last question for you is one that keeps popping up in the comments here. I see it keep scrolling by. How long should a resume be? Is there any hard rule to that, or is it as long as you need it to be?
You know what? When I first graduated, I always heard through the grapevine and just out loud, I don't know. Everyone always says it should just be one page. Your resume should just be one page. And the truth is, if you're an experienced professional, trying to limit everything that you've ever done into one page is just, it really is impossible. It may be okay to do that if you're a fresh graduate and you don't have that much experience to be able to list out. But if you already have several years of work experience, I would say for sure, take it to the 2 pages. 2 pages is standard. It's completely acceptable. But anything more than that, on the other hand, is showing the employers that you don't really know how to be concise, potentially, that you can't keep it, down. And the truth is, you're only really wanting to emphasize the most recent positions that you've worked at. You don't need to start writing out crazy detailed bullet points for jobs that you held 10 plus years ago. Those jobs can be kept to a minimum. You can just list the job title, the company name, and maybe 1 or 2 bullet points related to them. But you don't have to do these lengthy responsibility bullet points for every single job. You just want to emphasize the most recent ones, because again, that's what hiring managers are going to be looking at. So you want to pay attention to those and then keep everything that you've written, the profile, the professional experience, the education, all within 2 pages.
Yeah, no, I think that's really great advice. I think for most people, 2 pages will cut it. If you are a higher up executive, maybe you need to go to 3. But I think, for the most people, it's going to be 2. And Linda, I want to get to our member questions because we have so many amazing ones. But before we get to that, I just want to remind everyone that this is being recorded. So if you missed any of Linda's amazing advice, it will be here for you once we're done. It'll be archived here so you can watch it again and again. And I also want to address, I saw some people in the comments wondering about the difference between a resume and a CV, which is a curriculum vitae. They're mostly the same thing. In academics, they call something a CV, but it's a different beast entirely. For all intents and purposes, a CV and a resume are the same thing. So if you saw people asking about CVs and people asking about resumes in the comments, they're the same thing. So don't worry about that. Linda, the first question that I want to ask comes from Melissa. And she says, should I add a photo and colored text, or is that a distraction?
Okay, so I'm very old school in this sense and very traditional in that I believe it should just be black and white font, black font. And in this case, I mean, in North America, there's no requirement really for a photo. The truth here, though, is that recruiters are still going to jump on LinkedIn and look you up. And so they'll see your photo that way. So make sure you have a good photo on LinkedIn, on your LinkedIn profile. But on your resume, it's not required. And it's actually not standard either. So keep it black and white, keep it, and your nice photo, keep it on your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And I think photos used to be standard in other parts of the world, but in most cases, they've sort of phased them out because of the fear of discrimination in many cases. So a resume, the main thing is the content on your resume, not necessarily the color or anything like that. And we also have a question here that I think is really fantastic. And it's basically, how many jobs should you include on your resume? So this is from Mario. And I know a lot of people, especially people who are maybe later in their careers, they have a lot of jobs that span decades. Should they include all of them, or should they maybe get rid of some of those that are maybe more than 2 decades old, 15 years old? What do you think?
Yes. I mean, I've been pretty strict about it too. With that, I would always tell people, if you have within the last 10 years, is really what hiring managers are going to care about anyway. Anything older than that, they'll consider it irrelevant, as much as you may not. I mean, I know it's kind of disheartening to hear for some people who have extensive years of experience, but the truth is again, what have you done most recently? What have you done in the last 5 years is the most significant, and then within the last 10 years. So number of jobs, however many that means for you, that's going to vary depending on the person and how many jobs you've had in those last 10 years, but I would keep it to 10 years.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And we have another question here that's somewhat related from Karen. And Karen, honestly, thank you for asking this question. It's so good. There are some people who've been in jobs for a long time. And in Karen's case, she says, if you've been in a job for 25 plus years, how far back do you go in that job history? So maybe you've been at one employer for a long time. How do you do that on a resume? Do you just have one little chunk of text, or should you break that out into more responsibilities?
Yes, great question. So if you've been working for 25 years for the same company, first of all, kudos to you. That's amazing. That's rare. You don't hear about that these days. Uh, I would say clearly you've moved up throughout those 25 years, so you want to break it out so that it's easier to read in terms of the titles that you've held in those last 25 years. So even though the company has been the same, the job titles, I'm sure, have changed and the responsibilities have evolved, and so you want to break out your resume according to that. And so again, it still then stays within the same strategy that we're talking about, which is keeping the most relevant jobs, beefing those up as much as possible. And then anything that's further down the line, older experiences, they can be cut down to a minimum. So I would break it out by the job titles that you've held. The responsibilities would be then listed accordingly underneath those.
Yeah. Yeah, because people want to see growth in your career. And even if you've been at the same employer for that long, which is incredible and it should be applauded, you've grown, and that's really what recruiters and hiring managers want to see. And the next question comes from Meg, and Meg wants to know, how do you address gaps in your resume?
Yes. Okay. So this is the thing, is that if you it all depends on what the gap is. If the gap is because you stayed at home to take care of children, which I've worked with a lot of women that have had that experience, then that's fine. If you didn't do anything to upgrade your skills, if it wasn't a certification that you took on or extra schooling or anything like that, then I would just actually, you wouldn't even acknowledge the gap necessarily. You'd put the dates of the previous job, and then you'd put the dates of the most recent job that you've held. And I'm sure they're going to notice that maybe there was a year or two gap in between, but that's not a big deal. Now, if you took a gap and you actually did upgrade your skills, or you decided to pursue different types of work. So for example, I've had some clients and students who've gone on to do some consulting work, some freelance work, and they think that that's not relevant at all. But I would say you absolutely should include those on your resume to fill in the gaps if you can. And so you would call yourself consultant, or whatever job title it is that you gave yourself when you were working for yourself doing the freelance work, and you would list the bullet points as you would in any other job. So it all depends on your situation, but if you didn't do anything that you would say really helped you to upgrade your skills or keep you relevant from that perspective, don't even acknowledge the gap. Like some people, they'll actually put a reason for why they were off. I wouldn't even do that. Just let it be and submit. And then from there, have them ask you the question in the interview, and you'll be able to explain better in person.
And we have a question here from Nicholas, which I think a lot of people run into. And Nicholas wants to know, why is it that when I upload my resume into certain application portals, I'm prompted to manually enter my entire work history?
That's interesting.
Yeah.
You know what? It's hard to say. It might be a system thing where they just want to make sure that if you uploaded it, that it's almost like they're concerned that if you've uploaded it, that something might have gone wrong, that they might not be able to see it from that perspective. And so they just want to make sure that manually, if you're copying and pasting the actual words themselves and submitting it, that they have both versions. I worked at a recruitment office before where I did notice that to be the case, where the recruiters had a full PDF of the actual resume and application, and then they also had the question boxes with the type font in there, where the person actually submitted their experience manually, as you say. So I think it might just be to make sure that everything's there in the application included, in case one method of submission didn't include all the information they needed.
Yeah, and honestly, technology isn't perfect. So a lot of times applicant tracking systems may try and read your resume and port it over, but for some reason it can't. So, it is asking you to do it because it just says, listen, I can't read your resume. So can you please put in your work history here? So that could also be another reason. And also just, there's some people who run into this too. I always encourage people, when you are putting your resume or application in, to read the instructions. So if it says enter a PDF, enter a Word document. It'll usually tell you all of that, but make sure you're reading all of the questions. And Linda, I don't know if you ever hear this from clients, but a lot of them say, "Oh, I was immediately rejected from a job," but it doesn't mean that the applicant tracking system rejected you. It means that you probably answered a question that was known as what's called a knockout question. And basically, what that says is that you don't meet the minimum requirements for a job. So they're not even going to consider you because if you don't have a certain qualification, if you don't have a certain certification, sometimes it's by law that you have to have it. It'll just say, listen, I'm sorry, you can't continue with this. So that's also sometimes why you get immediate rejections or rejections at 1, 2 a.m. in the morning.
Yes, yes, and I agree with you on that. And if that's the case, then that's okay. You just move on to the job that you are fit for.
Definitely. And, we have a really great question here from Mario also. And they want to know, should you write a cover letter for every application? Are you pro cover letter or anti cover letter, Linda?
I am actually, in all truth, and I tell this to my audience and students too. I'm anti cover letter because when I was a recruiter and I was looking at hundreds of resumes a day, I never cared to look for the cover letter or even ask for the cover letter because everything that I needed was in the resume, and I could tell how well a person's communication style was and how experienced they were and all those things from the resume. So I never needed to get, a cover letter, if they really ask for it, of course, you definitely want to submit it, but keep it short and sweet and just give them just exactly what's needed, the most basic requirements of what's needed in a cover letter. But to be honest, if you have a really strong, compelling, attractive resume, that'll get you in for an interview, even without the cover letter.
You're very right, when it comes to cover letters, but I still love cover letters, but I'm a writer. So I'm always really pro cover letter, but no recruiter or anyone with recruiting experience takes my side on this. But I love cover letters as someone who does hiring. A lot of times that's what I love to look at because I'm hiring writers, I'm hiring reporters, and I want to see how they write. So it's often, probably by the specific job, but I still have a soft spot for cover letters, honestly.
I can understand that in that case for sure. That's almost
Yeah.
like a piece of an example of work for you, like a part of their portfolio or whatever you want to call it that you're looking at in a sense.
Exactly. And we have a question here, from really the career starter side of the spectrum. Amelia wants to know, what do you do when you're just starting out and don't have a lot of professional experience? Can you just list your college classes?
Yes. Okay. So if that's the case where you don't have a lot of experience, absolutely. But you also want to look back on your volunteer experience, any sort of clubs or extracurricular activities that you did in college, as well, in order to really round out your resume. Because the thing here is that your professional experience section is still a very important part of your resume. And if you don't have anything to include on there, it is going to be a little bit tougher for you to land those interviews. So you want to really hone in on, well, what have I done? Perhaps even in the classes or outside of the classes from an extracurricular standpoint that I could list down, that I could create bullet points for, that could describe my skill sets that I bring to the table. And from a course standpoint, I would say, yes, you can list the courses, but actually what's even more helpful is what kinds of assignments and projects. If you're in a science background, let's just say, and you actually did certain lab experiments and you worked on certain trying to resolve certain theories. I mean, I'm not a science person, so I don't know the lingo as well. But if you worked on certain projects and assignments within those courses, then I would take those and include them in your experience section and describe them as if they happened in a work setting, meaning use the same format, formulas to write out your bullet points, and you're just leveraging the projects and assignments that you did in the classes that you took. But it would be no different than if you did them in a work setting.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think that's really great advice. And we have a question here from Marsha that's somewhat along the same line. It's for career starters often. But we see so many job descriptions that say you need a minimum 5 years experience, minimum 2 years experience, or it's an entry level job that wants 3 years experience, and it almost doesn't compute. And Marsha wants to know, if you're a recent college graduate, how do you get noticed when it appears that all entry levels jobs are asking for 2 or 3 years experience?
I would ignore that. When you're a college graduate and you're fresh and you're wanting to find that first job and it's that entry level role, if you know that this is an entry level role, go ahead and apply for it. Do the best that you can using the strategy and process that I shared with you today on your resume, and apply for it. Don't ignore the 1, 2, 3 year requirements, because sometimes they just put that on there because, to be honest with you, they would ideally love it if somebody had 1, 2, 3 years experience. But the truth is, someone with 3 years experience isn't looking necessarily for that entry level role anymore. They're moving on to more of the intermediate, maybe even senior level roles. So you're the best fit for them from that perspective. Just ignore that part of it, and as long as everything else you can figure out a way to tailor yourself to be a match for, then go ahead and apply.
Yeah, and we have a question here from Gahane. Any tips about writing a resume or profile if you're changing careers?
Yes. The biggest thing about, and this is, I've helped people to do this successfully, switch from one type of career to another type of career. The biggest thing is understanding what experiences, what skills, what qualifications, what tasks that you've performed, that even though it's from a completely different job, completely different career, if that new job that you want to apply for, that type of career that you want to apply for, still requires those basic types of tasks and responsibilities, then make sure you leverage those and use the language that the new job that you're trying to apply for uses, and and then, sort of like just bring that over, transfer that over for the resume. So you're creating a resume instead of a senior accountant resume, and you don't want senior accountant jobs anymore. You want to move to senior financial analyst. Fantastic. That's fine. But now everything you're going to write about has to be related to what senior financial analysts do, but it has to also be truthful. Okay. I never advocate lying. Obviously, that's completely not something that I teach. It's all about using the experiences that you've already gained, and how do I incorporate the keywords in a way that I can leverage that experience and talk about it using in the way that the new job requires me to. So if you've analyzed reports in the past, and this new job is asking you to analyze, analyze performance reports. Okay, so you've analyzed. Sorry, I'm trying to come up with a really good example quickly, and it's kind of it's kind of blocking me. But if you've analyzed anything in the past, and this job is asking you to analyze reports, it's like, okay, I've analyzed this type of thing. I'm going to talk about how I've analyzed whatever I've analyzed, and I'm going to use it for this new job. Sorry, that was a terrible example, but I hope you get what I'm saying.
No worries. No, it's completely. And also, what I tell people all the time is, like, when they run into things about, if you have, if it's saying I need 2 or 3 years experience, or maybe the wording's a little bit different, the bottom line is, can you do the job? And it's not about, can you reach for the stars and get it done? Can you literally do the job? That's really what it comes down to most of the time. So when you read that good job description, it's sort of like, yeah, I would love to do this, and I want to do this. So I think that's the bottom line for a lot of them. And, we have time for one more question. And I think, it's so important. And Charles brought this up. Thank you, Charles. How, is there anything people, especially older job seekers, or people who are later in their career, should know about ageism when it comes to their resume?
Oh, this is a very sensitive topic to talk about, because as a recruiter, I can be honest and say that it, it, it does, I think, exist. That for certain career paths, ageism can play a role, in the sense that, they're wanting that up and coming individual for a certain position, but then they're wanting 15, 20 years of experience from that person, which clearly is not realistic. And so again, I think from a resume standpoint, if we're just talking about the resume, just make sure that you're keeping your experience to the most relevant experience, meaning, and the most recent experience that you have. So within the last 10 years. And if it's not relevant previous to that, then don't bother including it. And just if for certain, so like also education and things like that, if you don't want to include the date of when you graduated that college that you went to, then don't include it. I mean, that's up to you, in order to get your foot in the door in the interview, so that you can so that you can prove to them that you have what it takes. I mean, if you feel yourself that that's an issue, that's been an issue for you, if you truly believe that, then you can take those measures. But otherwise, if you're just following the strategy like I'm talking about, keeping it to the most relevant and recent experience, and you have what they're looking for, then really that shouldn't be the thing that stops you from getting the job that you want.
Definitely. And also own it. Don't be arrogant about it, but you have so much incredible experience the longer that you've been in the workforce, regardless if you change careers. So don't walk in with the idea that age is going to hurt you. Say, listen, I've been around, I've done all these projects, I've seen the evolution of this field or this industry, and I can help you with your problem. Because really, a job search, I always think, is sort of, employers are egotistical and they are selfish and they want to know how you can solve their problem. And if you have a lot of experience, you're bringing a lot to the table. So realize the wonderfulness of having all that experience and what you can do for an employer. And I think a lot of times just walking in with that self-confidence and that idea, listen, this is not something that hinders me. This is something that is an asset to you, will go a long way. And Linda, actually, one more very quick question before we go back to the members. References, what should you do? James and Mohammed wants to know.
References, I would leave until the very last point in the interview process where they actually ask you for references. Don't bother including your references up front on the resume. It's not required. It's not needed. They're not going to be calling them anyway until they've decided that you're the one that they want to hire. So leave it till that point when they actually outright ask you for them. And if anything, if they ask you for it, that's a really good sign. That means that an offer is likely coming your way.
Yeah, great point. And my next question is for our wonderful viewers and our members. So we are going to put up a QR code on the screen and a link, and we want to know what you thought of this whole session. Did you like what we talked about? What would be helpful for you in the future? The QR code, what you could do is open the phone option on or the camera option on your phone and take a picture of that, or it should bring up a little link, or you could type that link into your browser and it'll take you to a survey. Tell us what you thought of today. Tell us what would be helpful to you in the future. We literally just put these on hoping that they will help you with your job search, help you with your career. So we love to hear from you, and we really do take these to heart. So please make sure that you take the time to do this, because we really appreciate the feedback. We appreciate your engagement, and we appreciate you being here with us. And, Linda, I just want to thank you for being here too. And, so many people, they have follow-up questions. They want to see what a good profile looks like, what a good resume looks like. How can we get back in touch with you?
Yes, absolutely. You can definitely head on over to my website. That's lindarayner.com. I actually have free workshops on there. I have my free resume mastery workshop. I also have my interview strategy workshop. They're, like I said, free, and they go into even a little bit more detail and depth that we talked about today. So definitely check those workshops out. And I also have my YouTube channel if you ever want free tips and advice as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Linda. Thank you so much for joining us. And hopefully people find you on LinkedIn because you give so much wonderful advice.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this time.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it too. And I've enjoyed our time with you as well. Thank you so much for coming and stopping by and engaging. I hope that you were able to make some great connections, build your network, and also learn a lot. I know I learned some things. It was great seeing all of your comments. Make sure you're adding to the conversation. And if you missed any part of today's chat, you can obviously watch it again. And I can't wait till our next career talks. Thank you so much for joining us. And remember, the world is a crazy place. So make sure you're taking care of yourself first and foremost. You could only be a good candidate. You could only get a job. You could only get ahead in your career if you're safe and well enough to do so. So until next time, stay well and best of luck.